I must start by saying that this is not a simple anecdote to tell among friends at a gathering or around a campfire. It is an encounter that changed my life and way of thinking about what real fear looks like. It was a rude awakening that brought me out of the bubble of innocence I had been in all my life, and a chilling reminder that the world is much more complicated and mysterious than I thought. At the time, I was just a few weeks away from coming of age, 18 in this country, meaning I was right on the brink of adulthood, with all the responsibilities and freedoms that this new stage of my life would bring. It was precisely then, when I got into this experience, that made me walk right on the line between reality and a horror movie. As I was growing up, my grandfather became a sort of lesson in how complicated getting older can be, especially when the mind starts to fail. He suffered from Alzheimer's, and I can only say that he had good moments and others, not so much. Sometimes he was very lucid and you could converse with him completely normally as usual, but others, his memories seemed like a tangled mess. It was very shocking for me to see him go through that, especially because of the close relationship we always had. That's why I had the crazy idea of working on something that would help him with his illness. That's how the desire to be a social worker came to me. I thought, if I can help someone like my grandfather, maybe that would make me feel less helpless. But I had no idea what was in store for me. One night I began caring for an elderly man named Thomas, who suffered from terrible nightmares and hallucinations. I was hired by his youngest daughter, a middle-aged woman named Claudia, who worked as a nurse on night shifts. She was quite worried about him and needed someone to watch over him during the night she was on duty. Since I had a family background in these things, I thought I could handle it well, although nothing prepared me for the terrifying experience that awaited me the first night at Tomas's house. Claudia explained to me what was going on with her father before he left for work. She warned me that sometimes she saw things in people that didn't exist, but that sometimes she was aware that it was all just her imagination. She also told me that he could get very restless, but I assured her that I was ready, as she left with a worried expression that I couldn't get out of my head. Tomas, with his delicate body and that hair as white as cotton, barely managed to recognize me. It was as if he was looking right through me, his cloudy eyes reflecting a poignant mix of confusion and sadness. Words didn't seem to be his thing, or maybe he didn't have much to say anymore as he was mostly silent. And there I was, in that dark room with a faint smell of old books, wood, and memories, looking at him and wondering what thoughts would be crossing his mind. Was he looking to remember who he was or trapped in some distant memory of his past? Dealing with my grandfather and now with Tomas made me think about how fragile and complex our existence is, and the fact that in the end, what we are is the combination of our memories, what we have lived and what we have learned throughout our lives. I tried to make conversation with Tomas, a bit to check the state of mind he was in at the time, but he didn't share much, and that left me to move on to what I thought would be just a quiet and calm night. I settled into the living room, which had almost no furniture, and the only light came from an old lamp and the TV, which was stuck on a channel with reruns of classic black and white sitcoms. The sound was low, enough to break the awkward silence without disturbing Tomas, who was upstairs. After a while, I was near the TV, taking advantage of the light it emitted to read one of the books in the library, a novel by Garcia Marquez that I had started to read some years ago, but had never finished it. When suddenly there was the sound of footsteps shuffling down the upstairs hallway, right above me. I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to be startled by any noise, but the protective instinct inside me kicked in. I thought it must not be anything important, but I went to keep an eye on Thomas just in case. However, just as I was getting up from the furniture, I heard a door close. Maybe he had just gone to the bathroom, I thought, so I tried to ignore the strange uneasiness that was settling in my body and continued watching TV, but it wasn't long before the silence was broken again, this time by a terrifying scream that made me jump out of my seat. I ran upstairs without wasting a second and found Tomas in the hallway, terrified and wide-eyed, screaming at something unseen. I had to muster all my calm to be able to reassure him and convince him that he was safe and that there was no one there. After that, I guided him back to his room very carefully, as he was shaking with fear. I started talking to him to calm his nerves. I tried to get him to relax and waited for his breathing to stabilize a little. Gradually, his face began to become calmer as my words began to soothe him. Although he was still shaking a little, the extreme panic he was showing a few moments ago had subsided, so I dropped back on the couch downstairs, but the quiet didn't last long. The house started to make strange noises like murmurs, hisses, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls. I could also hear like something heavy crawling upstairs and a door creaking slowly. My mind was filled with panic, but I tried to remind myself that old houses make weird noises sometimes, which made me feel a little calmer, but it was still unsettling. However, around 2 a.m., a loud rumbling sound from the kitchen brought me out of my thoughts all at once. Once again, I jumped up and went to investigate to see what was going on in the kitchen, but then I noticed that the back door was banging against the frame, apparently open. I wondered if it had been left open from earlier or if Tomas had gone out. Likewise, I went over and closed it, then headed to the kitchen to see what was the reason for the noise there. But as I approached, I suddenly saw Tomas in the doorway, holding a kitchen knife in a trembling hand. He had a look of confusion and fear in his eyes, asking me who I was, and his voice could barely come out from how scared he was. "Are you an apparition or what's going on?" I tried to clear up his confusion with reassuring words. "Tomas, it's me," I said softly, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding like crazy. I took a step forward, trying to show him assurance and confidence, hoping to ignite a glimmer of recognition in his confused and dazed eyes. But it seemed he was trapped in another reality, where I was a stranger, an intruder invading his home. But suddenly, his confusion turned to blind fury, as if someone had flipped a switch. In that instant, fear began to invade me, and I knew he was about to launch himself at me with that huge knife he held in his hands. I put my hands forward and tried to explain once again to Tomas that I was there to take care of him. He hesitated for a few seconds, perhaps trying to figure out if it was just another hallucination of his tormented mind. But just when I thought I was getting a handle on the situation, Thomas raised the knife and glared at me furiously, making it clear what he would do next. Before I could say another word, Thomas lunged at me and threw 2 slashes that I managed to dodge by millimeters. I couldn't believe how agile he was, and the strength with which he threw stabs. For an instant I thought I couldn't dodge him, but I did somehow, and before he attacked me again, I shot out towards the door I had just closed, and as soon as I was outside, I closed it immediately, listening how Thomas stabbed it repeatedly on the other side and shouted insults and threats at me, convinced that I was a thief. I fled that house, running and breathing hard as I dialed Claudia's number with trembling hands. The cold autumn air shocked my face as I made my way down the long driveway, but the terror I felt was even more freezing. When Claudia finally responded, her voice sounded incredulous but also concerned. She asked me to stay, but I couldn't get the image of Tomas's furious face attacking me with the knife out of my head, so I refused. When she arrived, however, what she found was a far cry from the chaos she had left behind. As she told me over the phone, Tomas appeared to be at complete peace. She found him asleep in his bed as if nothing had happened. The only thing that made it clear that what he had told her about attacking me with a knife was true were the stab marks on the back door where I had escaped. When I spoke to her last time, I felt a little sorry for her because I could tell she was caught between her duty to her father and the harsh reality of the danger he posed to others and even to himself. For that reason, she decided that the best thing to do was to place him in a care home for the elderly and for him to receive 24-hour specialized care. Claudia told me that this was the 4th person she had hired in the last few months, but her father's condition was only getting worse. Even today, I still get chills just thinking that Thomas could have easily attacked me while I was lying on the couch, and if he had, I probably wouldn't be here today telling this story. I was super excited because I was finally starting work at this new accounting firm that was located in an old brick building downtown. My new desk was right next to a large window, and across from me was a girl with long blonde hair that covered her face. As I settled in, I looked at her and gave her a little nod, but she didn't even flinch. She was too focused on what she was doing to even say hello, apparently. "Hi, I'm Barbara. Nice to meet you," I tried to say, but received only silence as her pen sped across her notebook. I noticed that the scratching of the pen was really insistent, almost aggressive, and I assumed she would be into something important. As the morning progressed, I noticed that her pages were quickly filling up with strange scribbles, and at one point I tried to see what she was writing, but she quickly put her hand on the page as if she didn't want to be interrupted. During lunch, I joined some colleagues in the break room and ended up smoking a cigarette with Chantal, a very nice brunette I'd known since I'd applied for the position. "Hey, does the blonde-haired woman ever join you guys for lunch?" I asked her. She shot me a confused look. "Who do you mean?" "That girl who's always writing." She laughed nervously and told me, I don't know, she must be one of the OTAs upstairs. You'll never see her outside her desk." Then I looked at her. She was still sitting and not moving at all, while a pile of leaves fell to the floor. "Come on, it's also valid to take a break. Sometimes silence is okay," I said. But Chantal just shrugged and quickly said she had to get back to work, even though we still had a few more minutes. After Chantal left, I went back to my desk, but the sound of the pen was still annoying, so I decided to put on my headphones and listen to some music to try to block out the noise. A while later, as I got up to get a coffee, I glanced at the girl again. She was standing completely still now, her hand typing almost robotically and repetitively. I felt a little sorry for her as I assumed she was overworked. In the hallway, I bumped into Eric, one of the guys in the office. "Do you know if there's a problem with the heating?" "It's just terribly cold near my desk," I said. That was another thing. Where I was standing, it was freezing cold. It felt so strong that it got into your bones, but the girl next to me didn't seem to be affected at all, and she was wearing an executive suit with a short skirt. At my question, Eric raised an eyebrow and said, "I haven't heard any complaints about that. I'll check the thermostat and see what's going on." But the temperature seemed to have dropped further. I rubbed my hands together and looked at the thermostat. Everything seemed normal at 21 degrees. However, when I looked to the window behind my companion, I noticed something odd with her reflection. It didn't match what she was doing. Her reflection was sitting motionless, and suddenly her head slowly turned toward me. I gasped and blinked several times. When I looked again, her reflection had resumed moving as if nothing had happened. I thought I was starting to get tired and was seeing things. As it was nearing the end of the day, most of the coworkers began to pack up their things. "Hey, working girl, everyone's leaving. Do you need help with anything?" I asked her. She slowly stopped writing and raised her head, but her face was still hidden by her hair. Then a soft, almost imperceptible whisper reached my ears. "They don't see me." A shiver ran up and down me and I stood stiff as a statue. Then she lowered her head again and continued typing as if it were nothing, even faster than before. At that moment, the lights began to flicker. I looked around the office, but everyone seemed to be super calm, as if they weren't noticing what was going on with the lights or as if it was very normal. I tried not to give the whole thing any more thought. I just quickly gathered my things and got ready to leave. But as I was leaving, for some reason I looked back, and as I did, I saw that she was looking at me. Her face was barely visible, and then I noticed her dark, sunken eyes, which seemed to have an emotion I didn't understand. Something was not right with her, and I felt very uneasy, so I just turned and left the building. The next day, I came in and found a little post-it on my monitor that said, "Come to my office, Mr. Morrison." "Great, I just got here and I'm already in trouble," I muttered, before dropping my stuff on the desk and walking to my boss's office. When I walked in, Mr. Morrison looked at me with concern. "Everything okay, Barbara? Some colleagues noticed that you seemed distracted yesterday. Is there something you want to talk about?" "I'm fine," I quickly replied. He nodded but still looked concerned. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to come in, okay?" He said with the same worried expression. The blonde-haired woman wasn't at her post that morning or hadn't arrived yet, which made me feel relieved. I thought maybe she had taken the day off. Hours passed and she didn't show up. Later, as I was trying to concentrate on a boring spreadsheet, I noticed the monitor suddenly doing strange things. I decided to call Eric to come check, and he arrived frowning. "That's weird, it looks like a data error," he said. Just then, I noticed a reflection on my dark screen. It was her. She was next to me and with her face very close to mine. I turned immediately, but no one was there. "Did you see it?" I asked Eric, my heart racing. He shook his head and smiled at me knowingly. "Take care of yourself," he told me, and then walked away. What the hell was that? I said to myself, but then shook my head and tried not to make a big deal of it. Maybe it was stress. I went about my day as normal, but I couldn't get what I had seen on my monitor out of my head. At the end of the day, the office was almost empty and I decided to investigate. I approached his desk and saw his notebook. It was there, filled with frantic writing. I hesitated for a moment, but then I picked it up and looked through it. But as I did so, I froze. The pages were filled with a single sentence. "They don't see me, they don't see me." My impression was such that the notebook slipped from my hands and fell to the floor. A shiver ran through my body as I tried to find an explanation for everything, but suddenly a shrill voice made me turn around. It was her. Her long, thick blonde hair no longer hid her face, and her skin looked pale, almost transparent. Her eyes looked empty, full of desolation. "I was like you, new, eager," she said as tears streamed down her cheeks. "They pushed me away, now they don't see me, and you don't see." The room suddenly went dark, and as I tried to walk away, I stumbled and fell, but when I looked again, she was gone. Then the lights came back on and everything went back to normal. I was completely paralyzed, bewildered, and panicked to death, so I just grabbed my things and ran out of there. The next day, I put in my resignation and went back just to get my things, but as I was packing, I found a small envelope on my desk containing a faded photo of the woman smiling at a party. On the back it said, "Helena Woods." I couldn't help but walk up to Mr. Morrison and ask, "What happened to Helena Woods?" At the mention of that name, he stiffened and narrowed his eyes. "Helen was employed here, but she left some time ago." "Like, left?" I asked. He stiffened even more and said, "She was a hard-working woman. She really wanted to excel and had high aspirations, but she was very obsessed with it. And one day, she jumped out of the window where you sit after she was denied a promotion she deserved, and it went to another girl." As he spoke, the light in the room seemed to grow thicker. Then he continued, "She used to say, 'You guys don't see me all the time,' because she felt undervalued." "Why didn't anyone tell me that?" I asked, feeling a little indignant that this information had been kept from me, even when I asked about it. "It's something we don't talk about. I'm sorry." As I left, I glanced over to the window next to my desk, and for a second I thought I saw her there, standing there, glancing down. Then she vanished like a shadow. I never saw her again. Perhaps she finally found peace in feeling that someone saw her. I know you all clicked on this video looking for stories about horrible bosses or terrifying coworkers, but the story I'm going to tell you today is totally different. It's about a job I should never have taken. At the time, my life was in a hole. I lost my job because of the recession, and after that, the financial situation was pretty tough for me. I had to sell my apartment, my car, my most valuable belongings, and I was broke, stuck in a cheap rental apartment in a rough part of town. It was just then that I saw an ad online that caught my attention. They were looking for someone to take care of a property. Desperate to get out of that situation, I decided I would take anything, and this job seemed like my chance. Plus, I was in another state, so it also suggested a total change of scenery, something I needed. The employer mentioned that he had a family home and several acres of land there, and was looking for someone to take care of everything, and also offered housing and utilities included. After years in a bustling city like Los Angeles, the idea of moving to the country sounded perfect for me. So I sent in my resume without hesitation. Upon reviewing my experience and education, the property owner hired me immediately, and my past working on farms as a child gave me bonus points. Soon after, I received an e-ticket to fly to Colorado to start work immediately, so I packed my bags and was on my way to my new home in no time. From the moment I stepped off the plane, the first thing I noticed was the cold. It was a big change from the warmth of Los Angeles. Before embarking on this trip, I had done some research on the owner of the property. I learned that he was a retired veteran who lived in Atlanta and had an import business that was doing very well. The property, called Villa Hermosa, had been in his family for generations. Justin, as he wanted to be called, had no children and was looking for someone to take care of this family estate that was so important to him. When I was given the job, Justin showed me in pictures a beautiful wooden house, surrounded by nature. But when I was taken from the terminal to the property, I realized that I would be living in the middle of nowhere. The house was in the middle of a mountain, quite far from civilization. Then I thought that maybe that was the reason why the job didn't have too many applications. Now I understood why I was hired so quickly. I can't lie, it was a little scary to think about living alone in such a big place, especially in the Colorado winter. When I arrived, Justin was waiting for me. I also met Amelia, the housekeeper, who was another older woman. Justin welcomed me and showed me around while a driver took my bags to my new cabin located next to the main house. During the tour, he told me that not only would I be taking care of the property, but that I would also have to tend to the 40 sheep and 3 horses on the farm. That took me by surprise, but looking at the paycheck, I knew there must be a catch to it all. Justin had a flight back to Atlanta that same night, so he left after giving me the tour, but before he left, he told me that Amelia would be coming in to clean once a week, and that the next day, a former employee named Steven would be arriving to explain my duties. Having worked there before, he would be the ideal person to show me how things worked. The next day, Steven arrived early, and the first thing he said to me was that he wished me the best of luck in my new job. Before I could ask any more questions, he was on his way to the barn, starting to explain the routine for taking care of the sheep and horses. He spent most of the day explaining to me what the job was all about, and of course it was quite physical and tiring work. But after sitting at a desk for so long, this was a good way to give my heart and muscles a jolt to get them back in tune. As I was taking in all the information and instructions Steven was giving me, I never asked him why he had left work or why he wished me luck, even though this had intrigued me a bit. The next day, my new role as ranch guard began. It was not something I had wanted or even imagined I would ever do in my life. But it was what was there, and I was grateful. At least I had 3 meals, a roof over my head, and a good salary. That's without having to pay rent, utilities, or even for food. What more could I ask of life at that point? A little hard work was no big deal. However, after a full day of work, my muscles were screaming and my body was screaming for some rest. So after dinner, I went to sleep like a log in my cabin. Oh, and don't think my cabin was what one would imagine. Actually, it was more like an annex to the main house, a sort of guest house with a foyer, kitchenette, bedroom, and bathroom. It was much better than my old apartment in town, which was a complete mess. A week went by and I thought I was doing a good job. Amelia, the housekeeper, was a most kind and nice lady, and she brought me things and food every week. One night, while I was in bed reading before going to sleep, I heard the sheep bleating like crazy, and that didn't seem normal to me, so I decided to go investigate. When I got to the barn, everything seemed quiet, so I went back to sleep. But the next day, when I went back to feed them, I noticed that 2 sheep were missing. I searched the barn and all over the property, but there was no sign of them. I didn't want to worry Justin, so I kept it a secret, but I did mention it to Amelia, and she just mumbled something I didn't understand and hurried off to do her work. The next day, when I saw 2 more sheep go missing, I was alarmed. I didn't want them to think I was useless and fire me, so I decided that I would stay up that night to watch the sheep and catch whoever was stealing. I was convinced it wasn't a wild animal, because it would have left tracks, so I knew it was someone else on the prowl. That night I sat up in the barn, sitting on a pile of hay, lit with a flashlight, and with a gun in my hand. Around 2 a.m., the sheep began to make a ruckus, as if they sensed something strange in the air, something dangerous. I kept calm, though I could see and hear nothing out of the ordinary, but I knew the sheep thief was nearby, and it didn't take long for him to make himself known. The light from the bulb in the barn was very dim, so when the door opened I couldn't make out anyone. So I got up and moved forward with the gun pointed at the entrance, but when I saw what was inside the barn, I gasped. There, right on the threshold of the barn, I saw a person approaching a sheep on all 4s. But I'm not talking about just any person, this was a woman, and the only reason I knew it is because she was naked. But this woman was covered in mud as if she had been rolling on the ground. She was very thin, she had no hair, her nails were long and dirty like claws, and her arms and legs seemed longer than normal, or maybe it was because of that animal position she was walking in. I was shocked. I had never seen anything like it in my life, so I could hardly believe what was in front of my eyes. I was terrified, and I know it's hard to believe, but guys, it was real. As it approached the sheep, I noticed its mouth was dripping with saliva as if it was about to attack. Even though I had my gun in hand, I was not prepared to shoot because, as I told you, the scene left me in shock. Suddenly, she turned her neck in a strange way and looked at me, and to my utmost horror, she had no eyes, just empty dark holes where they should be. Her teeth were pointed like a piranha's, and if I wasn't terrified enough already, she started running towards me, just the same, on all 4s. At that moment, I recoiled out of pure instinct and pulled the trigger towards her several times, but the bullets didn't seem to do anything to her, and just as I was about to change the magazine, she had already grabbed me by the ankle and started dragging me into the woods. I screamed in terror and struggled as best I could to try to get free, but her grip was so strong it was as if I was trapped in a vice. I tried to shoot him again, but it was no use. I was moving my feet like crazy trying to get free, but there was no way she was going to let go. Then, out of desperation, I saw a dead branch nearby. I grabbed it and stabbed it with all my strength into her leg, and then she gave a shriek and suddenly let go of me as she fell forward. I took the opportunity to get up and ran like a runaway horse back to the barn, but she was coming after me on all fours. I could hear her and she seemed enraged, but I didn't stop. When I got to the barn, I did the only thing I could think of at the moment. I took the diesel lamp I had been carrying and threw it at her. Then the glass exploded and fire engulfed her. She started screaming and yelling as she retreated, running into the woods, away from the property. At that point, I ran to the cabin and locked myself in there with my lighter at the ready and a can of diesel that I kept for the lamp in case she returned. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink, as you might imagine, and the next day I called Justin and told him what had happened. It was then that he explained the whole story to me. The locals knew this creature. They believed that the woman was the daughter of the devil, an evil and inhuman creature of whom little is known. They only knew that she lived in the mountains and hunted farm animals for food. But if a human crossed her path, she would eat him too. That was the reason no one wanted the job. According to Justin, I was the only one who had made it out of the thing's attack alive. I was very angry to hear this. Justin was basically telling me that he had sent me to the slaughter, and he was confessing it just like that without guilt. He knew that such a creature was on the loose out there and didn't even warn me about it. I didn't spit the insult on his lips because I still needed him to pay me so I could get the hell out of there. And so it happened. That same day I gave him my resignation, picked up my 4 things and left back to California, but this time to San Francisco, where fortunately I got a job as a kitchen helper. And today I have my own restaurant. All this happened 2 years ago at a time when I was completely broke and doing miracles to make ends meet. I didn't want to go back home to my parents, so I started desperately looking for a job on Craigslist. I spent hours every day looking for ads, sending in applications, and I can't even count how many times I hit those screens hoping to find a job, doing whatever it took to get out of the financial hole I was in, until one day I finally got a response from a guy who said he was disabled and needed help with his daily routines. There weren't many details about his situation, but all that mattered was that he was looking for a caregiver and was willing to pay him well. So, without much thought, I took the job. The next day, I planted myself at his address, ready to get started on my new job. Turns out the guy lived in an apartment in a quiet neighborhood, although the building itself looked like it hadn't been cared for in years. But hey, it wasn't unexpected. I knocked on the door, and from inside I heard a voice telling me to come in. Upon entering, I was met by a man in his late 50s, but he looked pretty bad for his age. He was sitting in a wheelchair, and really his appearance was a bit disconcerting. His face looked like a melted candle, and he had a dull, sleepy look, his lower eyelids drooping in a way that showed his conjunctivae reddened. His hair was spiky and looked very unkempt, but what caught my attention the most were his teeth, which were like those of a beaver. That is, he had unusually long top front teeth, which didn't help matters. His appearance was really strange, but I didn't want to focus on that. I just greeted him politely and he asked me to come closer. Then he said, "Hi, I'm Martin. We spoke on the phone last night. I know you're not very bright, but you seem like a pretty girl. I can't see very well these days." Truth be told, those words sounded weirder and more disturbing than I expected. But I was already there and I needed the money, so I tried not to let that make me uncomfortable. I hung my jacket on the coat rack and asked him, "Okay, what do you need me to do first?" He grinned from ear to ear and said, "We could start with a bath. I haven't had a bath in weeks." I kept thinking, dang, that doesn't sound good at all. His request certainly took me by surprise, but given the situation, I knew what I was getting myself into, so I grabbed the wheelchair and started wheeling him to the bathroom. "Do you live alone?" I asked him as I pushed him. He replied, "Yes, my wife passed away in December. She was the sweetest woman ever, and the one who helped me with all my things." "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," I said. "Call me Martin, please," he corrected me somewhat seriously. When we got to the bathroom, I gasped at the scene. The bathtub was full of dirty water and the sink was in a state that almost made me vomit. "I'm sorry for the mess. As you can see, my legs don't work anymore, that's why I can't clean the place properly, Martin said, and I could tell he was a little embarrassed. You should consider hiring help for that too, I mentioned. Yeah, I'm learning to use Craigslist for that, he admitted. And thus began my peculiar adventure with Martin. As I helped him with the bathroom, he started talking about how amazing the internet is. It's crazy, isn't it? You can meet anyone with just one click, he told me as I tried to concentrate on what I was doing. Yeah, it amazes me more and more, I replied, knowing I was in the middle of a pretty strange situation. Well, take off your shirt so I can get started, I said to break the ice a little. When he took off his shirt, I almost fell backwards. The guy had a lot of hair on his chest like he was a bear, not to mention his back. I poured shower gel on his back and started rubbing. Ow, that tickles, he said, laughing, as the water and soap started flying everywhere, even landing on me. This is getting crazy, I thought, but all in all I was having a little fun. Finally, we finished the bath and I passed him a towel. Dry that body well, Martin. A little movement will do you good, I said with a smile. But he gave me a look back as if I had offended him, and his expression changed from cheerful to stern. After that, I helped him get dressed, and honestly, his look made me a little uncomfortable. He was smiling all the time, as if he was planning something weird. I took him to the dining room table and decided to prepare some food. I cooked a good amount of pasta, enough for him to have for the whole week. I came back with 2 plates ready to eat, and just as I was about to serve us, he interrupted me. Jenna, before we eat, could you do me a favor? He asked. What do you want, Martin? I replied. Look, I have to get to bed soon and my life is complicated enough as it is, so please don't make this any harder for me. His words began to make me uncomfortable. I'll give you an extra $200 for this, he continued, so that would make us $400 for the day. What do you say? The amount sounded tempting and I desperately needed it, so I asked, what do you want me to do? And he, with sarcasm in his tone, said, I just want to have a nice dinner with a pretty girl. Oh, and I have my wife's clothes still in the closet. Why don't you put some of those on and join me? At that moment, my eyes went wide, and the truth is, I didn't know how to feel about it. You really want me to wear your deceased wife's clothes for $200? Wow, this is too much, I said. But I figured at least that was better than if he asked me to take my clothes off, so I agreed. I went to his room and, oh my, it was like a fashion closet. The clothes were all kinds and looked very expensive, but in the end I picked out a red dress that I thought was very pretty and went back to the table. Wow, I bet you've never looked so beautiful, she said, as I sat down at the table. Thank you, I replied, trying not to think too much about the situation. Then he asked me to sit next to him. For an instant, I thought about refusing, but he told me that if I did, he would give me 50 more, so I did, and we began to eat in awkward silence. His eyes were so fixed on me that I could almost feel myself sweating from the pressure, but I needed the money, and as long as his hands stayed away from me, I could deal with this. However, in a moment he rested one of his hands on my leg and began to caress it. This action sent shivers down my spine, and I asked him to please not do that. Then he said, "Come on, Jenna. I'm just an older disabled man who gets a little lonely." When I turned to look at him, I saw that his eyes were fixed on my cleavage and his expression really repulsed me. At that point, I told him I couldn't go through with it and removed his hand from my leg roughly. But when I tried to get up, he tugged at my dress, or rather he tugged at his wife, which had a row of buttons down the front, and the pull caused them all to tear, leaving me completely exposed. Seeing what he had done, I immediately grabbed both sides of the dress with my hands and covered myself and complained to him for having done what he did. However, he just flashed a disturbing smile, then said to me, "Jenna, don't make things difficult. This can be beneficial for both of us. Look, if you take off your dress for me and let me photograph you, I'll give you $600, but if you also agree to do something else, I'll give you $1,000. What do you say?" I was completely dumbfounded. I couldn't believe what he was proposing, but that's not the worst of it. I was so needy at that moment that for an instant I considered it, but what he was proposing and the way he was looking at me and talking to me gave me so much repulsion that I just said no and ran to the wife's room, taking off my dress and putting my clothes back on. But then he appeared at the door with the $400 he had initially offered me and told me to take it. For a moment I thought about refusing it, but God, I needed it so badly. However, as he handed me the money, his dirty hand brushed mine as he stared at me. It was a strange moment, and just as I was about to leave, he yelled at me, "Wait, one last thing. I turned my head in frustration, and he, in one swift movement, pulled a Polaroid camera from the side of his chair and said, "Do you mind if I take your picture, Jenna?" "Don't," I replied, but it was too late. He had already photographed me without my permission. I went home immediately, feeling a mixture of humiliation and disgust at myself, and as I walked through the door, a flood of tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to burn the money he had given me, but I knew that what I had endured could not be in vain. The next day, I decided to go to the police to report him, not sure if my complaint would be taken seriously. Luckily it was, but when they went to look for him at his address, they told me that there was no one living there. It was a hard blow, and I was left with a bitter taste in my mouth, but at least I knew I would never see him again. After that unsettling experience, I really doubt I will ever look for work as a caregiver again. It's funny how desperation leads you to accept anything, even if it's the worst. When I got out of prison after 8 long years of confinement, I felt like the world had moved on without me. I couldn't blame anyone, of course. My reputation was in tatters for all the misdeeds I did, and that put me behind bars during these last 8 very long years. The only thing I had left was my ability to adapt to anything, the only advantage I had in a society where I didn't seem to be welcome at all. For the past few months, I had survived by serving drinks in a small-time bar in town, a place where no one cared much about my background, but what they paid me was barely enough for ham sandwiches in a grimy room in a neighborhood that left much to be desired. So when I saw an ad looking for a housekeeper in a Carolina villa, I didn't hesitate for a second to write. Goodbye to the drunks who treated me like I was anything. I just wanted something that would keep me off the streets. The interview was a bit unsettling. Omera, the owner of the villa, was a 76-year-old widow. From the moment I saw her, something struck me as odd. Her smile was too forced, as if it didn't fit her face. Her eyes twitched nervously, and suddenly she let out a soft but creepy laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. I saw her whispering to herself, something too low to understand, and inside me the alarms were screaming for me to leave. But I needed this job. I needed it badly, and the pay was good. "There's not much to do, just cleaning and taking care of my son Kane," she explained, her eyes wide. "He's been laid up. And my daughter Dalila is kind of shy," she continued. Omera's laughter filled the air with a high-pitched, strange sound that immediately made me uncomfortable. She mentioned that Dalila was a nice girl, albeit quiet, and glanced over her shoulder as she peeked out the door and then closed it when she saw me turn to look at her. I took the job because I didn't have much of a choice. By that point, I had been kicked out of the room, and I wasn't going to sleep in my car. It wasn't a viable option for the future. So the next day, I packed my few things and moved into the villa. The house was huge, but not cozy at all. I got the impression that a dark shadow inhabited it, but I tried not to make a big deal out of it. Omera showed me to my room in the attic, and while smiling as if she was fascinated, before leaving, she said in a serious tone, "There is only one rule here: never leave your room after midnight." Before I could ask why, the attic door creaked and slammed shut, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That first night was terrible. I couldn't sleep. The wind was blowing hard against the old windows, and there was a strange sound, almost like a whisper coming from below. The next morning, I was already questioning whether I had made the right decision in taking that job, but ignoring my anxiety, I started cleaning the house, which looked like a battlefield. Omera and Dalila were living like there was no tomorrow. There was dirt everywhere, the towels were strewn about, the dishes were covered in old food debris, and the bathroom was a horror in its own right. But the real nightmare was Kane's room. When I walked in, I knew he was in a coma, as Omera had told me, but I never imagined the stench of bleach that was going to hit my nose. His room was neat, almost hospital-like, but the air was laced with a strong smell of chemicals. Meanwhile, Kane lay motionless on the bed, pale as a ghost, and for a second I thought he wasn't breathing, but the beeping of the heart monitor assured me he was still alive, at least for now. I was completely exhausted, and as soon as I dropped onto the bed, I lost consciousness. It must have been close to 1 a.m. when a shrill scream jolted me awake and my heart skipped a beat, causing me to roll over and fall out of bed onto the floor. When those high-pitched, desperate screams sounded again, without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and ran out of the room. My feet stopped in front of Kane's door, which was ajar. Looking inside, I saw that the bed was empty and the heart monitor made no sound. The sheets were tossed, but he wasn't there, and that took my breath away. Had he woken up? Can you come out of a coma like that out of nowhere? As I was thinking about that, a strange, deep sound echoed from the basement, and my feet, as if they had a mind of their own, carried me there. I thought again that I should run out of that house and never look back, but I couldn't, so I just went down the stairs slowly, step by step, until I reached the basement door. When I got there, I saw that the door was ajar and an orange light was flashing, illuminating the interior and freezing me in place. The scene I saw inside that basement was horrible. O'Mara was hunched over a board and her hands hovered over Kane's motionless body. No, the guy was not in a coma. His skin looked gray and his lips and eyes were sunken and half open. It wasn't Kane at all, it was his corpse. And next to O'Mara, Delilah was shaking like a leaf, her eyes wild with fear. "What the hell are they doing?" I shouted, not knowing what a grave mistake I was making. At that moment, O'Mara's head suddenly shot up and her eyes were an ocean of madness. The woman was completely out of her mind. "Shut up, I'll bring him back," she screamed, and before I knew it, she caught me by the neck, squeezing it tightly. My vision blurred instantly, but just when I thought I was going to pass out, Delilah somehow managed to lift a heavy candlestick and tossed it towards her mother. Then O'Mara collapsed to the floor, and I was finally able to catch my breath. Delilah fell to her knees, sobbing. I did my best to calm her, but through tears she said in a trembling voice, "Kane died 5 days ago. He fell down the stairs, Mama." But O'Mara could not accept the truth. She said she could bring him back. Then the bile rose in my throat as everything began to click. That stench of bleach and chemicals made sense now. O'Mara was obsessed with reviving her son. We immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, I was gone. I didn't want to listen to their questions or wait for explanations. I just got in my car and got out of there as soon as possible. But as I drove away, I kept my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. I expected to see O'Mara's unhinged face smiling, but there was only darkness. I could have escaped from that house, but I could never free myself from that horrible memory. Let me tell you my story. I'm Brittany, and I'm going through one of the scariest times of my life. It all started a few days ago when I decided to look for a new job. I live in government housing and was unemployed, so when I saw an ad promising employment as an assistant, it immediately caught my attention. The ad said I only had to make one call to leave my name and address, so I jumped in and dialed the number. "Hello, I'm calling regarding the assistant offer. Are you still available?" I asked, with a slight tremor in my voice. On the other end, a gravelly voice answered, "Yes, can I have your name and address?" It was a big mistake, but I gave it to him. The guy assured me I could start right away and sent me the address of a warehouse. Without much thought, I hopped on a bus headed for the place, hoping to get the job I so desperately needed. When I arrived, the air was thick with the stench of mold and decay. Everything around me was in chaos. The floor was covered with discarded and broken items, and there were pieces of boxes everywhere. It was clearly not what I expected, and at that moment, I felt a shiver go up my spine. I started to think that maybe I hadn't made the best decision in going to that place. But suddenly a tall, strange-looking guy approached me. His skin was a weird deathly gray color with a slight yellowish tinge, and his eyes looked like those of a snake because of the sharpness of his gaze and the greenish color of his irises dot. He had thin lips that looked puckered, and his presence was intimidating. "You're the new assistant," she said in a voice that left no room for doubt. "Your job here is to move furniture and objects when necessary. And remember, don't open any boxes. That's rule number 1. Despite his bluntness, I nodded. I certainly didn't like the way he was looking at me, nor the overbearing, obnoxious tone in which he spoke, but I let it go. The manager was quick to give me instructions, and I was soon caught up in the work. Before I knew it, he had positioned himself right behind me and was watching me move boxes and furniture. With each passing hour, I became more and more uncomfortable, as the boxes I needed to move were very heavy, to the point where I had to strain hard just to move forward. The uncomfortable feeling of knowing that he was watching me made everything even more difficult because I felt a lot of pressure. However, at one point he left the place and let me do my work on my own. Curiosity has always lost me, so of course I couldn't help but wonder what was in those boxes he was organizing and why they were so heavy. It was as if a voice in my head was nudging me to open them and look at what was inside. And although I kept trying to ignore my curiosity the whole time, I finally couldn't resist and opened one of them. As I did so, some packing peanuts spilled out and a disgusting stench escaped from the box. As I removed the packing material, what I saw made me jump back. It was a hand. A hand in a rotting state was sticking out from among the peanuts. My stomach immediately churned and I panicked from head to toe. God, where have I gone? What is all this? At that instant, I heard the manager's voice behind me. "What are you doing, girl?" His voice was full of fury and made me turn around in my tracks. His gaze was now more terrifying and fear gripped me. I was trapped in a nightmare and didn't know how to escape. "You remember what I told you about opening the boxes, right?" "Well, that's become a giant problem now, Brittany," said the manager, who was a guy who looked like something out of a horror movie. He looked at me with eyes that sparkled with anger as he held a crowbar in his hand. "You're fired," he yelled, roughly dragging me by the arm. I tried to let go, but he pushed me into a back room and made me sit in a chair. Then, with one swift movement, he cuffed my wrists to the armrests, without me being able to do anything to stop him. I immediately started screaming, "Let me go, please." But the guy had no intention of listening. "You're witnessing something you shouldn't have seen, and since you know what I'm doing, I can't let you go free. What I need to do is call someone to take care of you." Those words made me shudder, but before I could say a word, he was out of the room like a bolt of lightning, leaving me trapped and all alone. Fortunately, luck smiled on me a little, as being rather thin, I managed to slip my wrists out of the handcuffs, and without wasting any time, I ran out of the warehouse, feeling my heart beating a mile a minute. The manager had slipped into a small room, and I thought he might be talking on the phone. If he caught me again, there was no way I was going to tell. So I ran as fast as I could with my adrenaline pumping, until I finally arrived at a police station, drenched in sweat and out of breath. I told the officers everything that had happened, and luckily, they took the situation seriously and sent some of their colleagues to the warehouse. One of the officers offered me a ride home, and I accepted, relieved not to be alone. But I quickly noticed that something wasn't right. "Where are you going? This isn't the way to my house," I said, realizing I was taking a detour. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw those evil eyes glinting in her gaze. And that's when I realized that the officer was taking me back to the same place I had just escaped from. Panic came over me again, and on impulse I grabbed the door handle, pulled it open, and jumped out of the car while it was still moving. The fall was not pretty, obviously, but as best I could, I got up and ran without stopping until I got home, feeling every part of me burning with exhaustion. Once inside, I hid in my room, not knowing who to turn to or what to do. I could no longer trust the police, so what else could I do? As I was trying to calm down, my phone suddenly rang. I knew I shouldn't answer unknown numbers, but I did. Then I recognized the voice instantly. "You're not thinking of doing something stupid, are you? I'm coming to your house right now, don't move a muscle." I hung up in an instant and turned away from the window, turning off all the lights and locking the doors. I cursed myself for having had the bright idea to give him my address. In a moment, desperation and fear came over me more than ever, so I ran out of the house and asked one of my neighbors, Mrs. Margaret, for help. I hurriedly told her what had happened to me and asked her to please allow me to hide on her property. She was a 79-year-old widow and was sure that no one would suspect that I might be there. She was very surprised to hear what I was telling her, and just then I could see a black car pull into my driveway, so I begged her to let me in. Luckily, Mrs. Margaret saw desperation in my face and immediately opened the door for me to come in and offered me a place in her basement. It's been 5 days since that, and I'm still hiding in Mrs. Margaret's basement, and I have no idea what I'm going to do now.